It's very common to need to access files that were created in other software when you're working in Revit. So in this video, I want to show you the process of working with an AutoCAD DWG file within our Revit project. Now I'm going to go to the Insert tab for this, and there's two ways that we could access a CAD file, and that is either using the link mechanism or the import mechanism. Now, import would embed the file directly in the Revit project with no connection to the original. So if you needed to update changes, you would need to remove the original version, delete it, and then re-import from the updated one. Compared to link, where the link would be maintained back to the original file, and so you would simply refresh the link and it would capture the latest changes. Generally speaking, linking is considered the best practice, and so unless somebody tells you otherwise, you should really always default to using link, but you can check with your CAD or BIM manager to be sure what's used in your own firm. I'm going to be demonstrating with Linking CAD, and that button is right here. And the first thing I want to point out in this dialog is the file formats that are supported by this dialog. So notice that there are several different CAD formats supported. Now I'm going to leave it set to DWG, which is the AutoCAD file format, but you're welcome to explore the others on your own later if you wish. Now I'm going to select this AutoCAD floor plan file that I've provided with the exercise files at the top. Don't double click it, just simply single click on it. And there are three settings at the bottom of the dialog that I want to direct your attention to. Over here on the right, we have the positioning, which is set to origin to internal origin. I'm going to leave that just the way it is. In the middle, we have colors, which is currently set to preserve. I'm going to leave that set just the way it is. And then finally, over here on the left, we have this current view only checkbox. And for this example, I'm going to leave that unchecked. So let's go ahead and click open here, and you'll see the file appear. On my screen, it comes in this bright yellow color, and it's just a little bit off center. So let's think about those settings that I just pointed out to you in the dialog, starting with positioning, which was origin to internal origin. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here on the CAD file for this. Down at the bottom of the screen, there is this reveal hidden elements icon. Go ahead and click that. And what you're going to see is these little symbols appear here in the middle of the screen. Those are indicating the Revit origin. So this is the origin of the Revit file. And then as you can see, that lined up with the origin of the AutoCAD file, which happened to be the lower left-hand corner of the floor plan. So when we choose origin to origin, it just simply lines those 2 points up. And in a lot of cases, that's going to be the appropriate way to link the files in order to get proper alignment. Now, in some cases, it won't be. So if the file comes in and it's not in the right location, you can choose a different option there. But I think defaulting to origin is not a bad option in many cases. Now, next we had the colors, and I left it set to preserve. And as you can see, preserve doesn't look so nice on a light theme here in Revit. If you're using Revit's dark theme, then it probably looks just fine for you. Okay. So one option is that I could go to the View tab and I could toggle my canvas theme, and now it looks much better. So if you are comfortable working that way, then that will work perfectly fine. Now, the other option is that I could remove the link and relink it and invert the colors. And I'm going to show you that in just a moment. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about the last thing, which was the current view only setting. We left that unchecked. I'm going to open up a couple other views here and show you the result. Down here under coordination and floor plans, there's some working floor plans, and I've got this one called L1 working. I'm going to double click to open that up, and notice that the file displays here as well. Furthermore, if I go to the default 3D view, so the little birdhouse icon up here on the toolbar, that's going to open up the 3D view. And as you can see, the file shows here as well. I do want to stress that just because the file shows here in 3D doesn't mean that it all automatically became 3D geometry. Notice that it stayed flat and it's just a bunch of 2D line work that is sitting flat on the ground. Well, whatever the CAD file is that you bring in, it's going to come in as is. It's not going to automatically be converted to anything in Revit for you. That you would have to do on your own. That's a separate process. It's really important that you understand that if you're bringing in a 2D file, you get 2D line work in Revit. If you're bringing in 3D geometry from CAD, it'll stay 3D, but it's still going to be CAD 3D geometry. It won't become Revit elements like walls, doors, and windows. Now we understand those three settings. What I want to do is I'm going to go to the undo dropdown here, and I'm going to back all the way up to import vector data, and that's going to remove the file, reverse everything. I'm going to toggle my canvas theme back again because I prefer working on the light theme, and I'm going to bring the file in a second time and change a couple of those settings. So I'm going to go to Insert, go to Link CAD, select the floor plan again. I'm still going to do origin to origin, nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to change the colors to invert and turn on current view only. Now, if you're working in the Revit dark theme, don't invert the colors, leave them set to preserve, click open, and now you're going to see the difference, right? These colors are much easier to see on the light theme background, and this is the result of having checked current view only. If I click over here to the architectural floor plan, notice it doesn't display there. It's only displaying in my working floor plan here. If I go to 3D view, it's not displaying here as well. So the idea is that now the CAD file only displays in my working view, which I'm using it as a means to an end. It's going to be an underlay. And then when I'm done, none of the other views have it visible, so I don't have to worry about trying to hide it in all those other views. So that can be a good way to work if your intention for bringing the CAD file in is to use it as a basis for doing other design work, which is what I want to demonstrate for you now. So let's say that my designer worked in AutoCAD, and now I want to take their work and I want to start creating Revit geometry from it. Well, sadly, there's no button that's going to convert this CAD file to Revit geometry automatically. So that means I'm simply going to need to trace over this CAD file with Revit walls and doors and other elements. Okay. Now, I know at first that sounds a little daunting, but it's actually not that bad. Let me show you. So I'm going to go to Architecture, go to the Wall tool. Let me choose generic 12-inch wall if you're working in Imperial. If you're working in metric, choose generic 300. And move your mouse near one of the exterior walls here. And you might need to zoom in to see it, but it will sense where the center is between the two parallel lines. And you can just click to start drawing that wall. And notice that it lines up perfectly. Now stop a little bit short of the corner, which I know is a little counterintuitive. Press Escape once, so that's going to keep you in the command, but break the chain. And then it's much easier to sense the center line of the next wall if you do it that way. Press Escape once. I'm going to change the wall type now from generic 12 to generic 5. Zoom in even closer, and I'm going to repeat that same basic process on some of these other walls. Press Escape once, right? Find the center lines, press Escape once. You're going to ignore doorways. Okay, so doorways we're going to deal with by placing actual Revit doors. So let me just go ahead and place a few of these walls. That's enough to get the point across. Now I'm going to go to Trim and Extend to Corner. I'll trim up this corner. I'll trim up this corner. And then I'll use Trim and Extend multiple elements. Pick this as the boundary, extend this and this, click an empty space to reset. Click this is the boundary, click this and this, empty space to reset. This is the boundary, this and this, empty space. I'll click the modify tool to enter. All right, so there's some basic walls. Let me just throw a few doors in just to kind of make it look a little bit more complete. So I'm going to go to the door here. You can just use the default size that comes up, even though it's a little bit too large. I think it gets the point across. And I'm just going to place a few of these doors in here in various locations just to kind of get the basics down here. In this working view, it's a little bit cluttered, a little difficult to see what we've got. But notice if you switch over to the L1 architecture, it looks perfectly fine. If you go to 3D view, hold the shift key down and orbit, that looks perfectly fine as well. So the whole idea of working in the working view and doing current view only means that you can very easily use that as the basis for building your model, but then your other views, it automatically is not displaying. Now, the final thing I want you to see is the whole reason we chose Link was because we wanted to maintain the ability to be able to refresh this CAD file. So how do you do that? So let's say that the designer sent me an update. Okay, so now how would I access that update? Go to the Manage tab. You're looking for the Manage Links dialog. I'll click that. Now there's lots of tabs in here. We're going to stay focused on CAD files. So I'm going to click over there. There is my floor plan right here. Down at the bottom of the screen, you can see a number of buttons. I could reload this link. I could unload this link. I could add another link, remove it if I didn't need it anymore. Now, if the original owner of this file not only sent an update, but they changed the name, or if somebody on your firm moved it to a different location, then instead of reload, you can choose reload from. That's what we're going to do here. And you can see I've got an updated version of the floor plan in the same folder. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to click open, OK, and then you can see the effect of the change. Now, once again, notice that the Revit geometry has not responded to this, so you would need to make a selection of the appropriate elements that have been affected by the change and simply modify them. But you can snap to the geometry in the CAD file, so it's pretty easy for you to update your Revit geometry to match the new CAD file. So that is an example of a workflow that allows a hybrid between some folks that are working in CAD and others that are working in Revit. So if you find yourself in that scenario, then you can use some version of that workflow as your basic procedure. In this video, we're going to look at another example of bringing in an AutoCAD file, but for a different purpose. So there's a number of reasons why you might bring in external files. And in this example, I want to bring in an AutoCAD file specifically for the purpose of using it to generate topography in my Revit project. So if you're working with a civil engineer in your projects, then there's a pretty good chance they're working with an AutoCAD-based product like Civil 3D or just the main version of AutoCAD. In that case, they might be generating the site plan information, the civil information, as a DWG file. So we talked about bringing in DWG files in an earlier video. Well, I want to show you that workflow here, very specifically related to the idea of using it to create topography, because some of the settings we're going to choose are going to be a little bit different. So let me come over here to the Insert tab, and I'm going to do Link CAD. And again, if you watched the earlier video about bringing in CAD, then you know that linking is considered the best practice. So I definitely want to use Link here. Now, I've got a file called AutoCAD Site Plan, and I'm simply going to select it, not double click. If you double click, you'll miss the opportunity to configure the settings down below. Now, the settings remember the last settings you used. And the last time I was in this dialog, I was bringing in my floor plan in an earlier video. And one of the settings here that I absolutely need to change in order to use this AutoCAD file as topography is the current view only setting. If you choose current view only and your intention is to create topography from it, it will not work. Okay, so you must uncheck that. And the reason is that in order to create topography from the AutoCAD file, the polylines that are used to generate the contour lines need to remain in 3D. They need to remain at heights, at appropriate heights in 3 dimensions. Otherwise, we can't create topography from those elements. If you check current view only, it flattens everything out to a 2D kind of situation. So that's why we want to make sure that we uncheck this. Okay, so that's very important. Another setting that's very important to uncheck when you're bringing in large files like civil engineering information is the correct lines that are slightly off axis. Now, this is intended to assist you in files that are smaller in nature, like floor plans, details, and things like that, where something might have been drawn at 90 degrees, but Revit sees it as 89.999 degrees. Okay, so correcting that is what this checkbox is all about. Well, that's fine for rectilinear files or smaller scale files, but in a site plan, it might very deliberately be at 89.9 degrees because of the nature of that kind of drawing. So I recommend that in the case of site work, that you typically uncheck correct lines that are off axis. Okay, so more often than not, it'll do more damage than good. Okay, now units usually do the right thing when you bring in CAD files. In other words, Revit is usually pretty good about understanding what the units are of the file coming in. However, there may be instances when you need to change this. And if you bring it in and you suspect that things are not quite at the right setting, it came in a little too big or a little too small, then you can undo and try again by choosing the explicit unit. Now, the file that I'm bringing in here, I happen to know was generated in US survey feet. So if you want to be sure that it's going to interpret properly, you can go ahead and choose that import unit. It won't hurt anything by doing that. Okay, but if I want to make sure that it's using US survey feet when it comes in, then I can select that from the list there. Okay, so those are just some examples of some of the settings you might want to do a little differently when you're bringing in files specifically for the purpose of creating topography. Now, the rest of it, I'm going to leave the way it is. I'm going to invert the colors. I'm going to still use the origin. If we don't like the way it comes in, the physical location, we can always move it later. Okay, so let's see where it comes in with the origin and then potentially move it. So I'm going to go ahead and click open here and let's see what we get. So the first thing that happens is I get this warning down here at the bottom, and it says that none of the created elements are visible in this floor plan, and it suggests some things that I want to check. So this again has to do with the fact that this is civil engineering data. And most of the time, those contour lines are going to be set relative to sea level. Okay, and that's the case here. So all of the contour lines that I need to use to create that topography are way over my head right now, because they're set at a height that is much taller than what this particular floor plan is able to show. So what I usually recommend that you do is immediately go to a default 3D view, and that usually will expose the problem. Now, to really understand this better, you can actually use the view cube here, or just simply hold the shift key down and orbit, and then you can start to see what the issue is, right? So do you see how those contours are way above our head, right? So that's what the issue is in that situation. So I think the easiest way to deal with this is going to be to try going into either an elevation or a section view, because then we'll be able to see the height more clearly. Now, we could use any one of these elevations, but actually there's a working section already in this file, and I'm going to expand that branch, and it's called section 1, and I'm going to double click that to open it up. And what I like about using the working section is, as you can see, it's uncropped. Okay. If we had used one of the elevations, they would be cropped down to this rectangle here, and we still wouldn't be seeing the CAD file. So it gets frustrating if you don't open up the correct view. All right. So I'm going to select this, and what I really want to do is move it down. But of course, you can see that I won't be able to do that because it is pinned. Because remember, I chose that origin to origin option, and origin to origin automatically pins it. So simply unpin it, and then we can go to our move tool, and we're going to move this thing down. Now, you probably want to be somewhat scientific about this. So it's a really good idea if you can take a look at the CAD file and see what the contours are. I don't remember exactly, so I'm going to do it in 2 steps. I'm going to start anywhere here. I'm going to pull it straight down, and the contours are measured. This is an imperial file. Okay, so we're going to use imperial units here, even if you're working in metric. But the contours are at about 780 feet above sea level. So what I'm going to do is take my best guess here, and I'm going to use 780 feet. Now, if you're working in either file, I want you to type 780 and then the foot symbol. If you type the foot symbol, which is just the single quote next to your enter key, if you type that, regardless of what unit you're working in, Revit will understand that you mean feet. Okay. If you put in M, it would think you meant meters. If you put in MM, it would think you meant millimeters. If you put in the double quote, it thinks you mean inches. So using the unit designation is the way that you can tell it, I want to use this unit even though my project is set to something else. So even in the metric file, type in 780 feet, press enter, and it should get close, right? It should move down into this general location. Now I'm going to go back to the site plan, and what I'm hoping to be able to do is to see these contour labels, and you can see that I did remember correctly. It was 780 was one of the numbers there. If you got here and you realized that I was off, it was 790 or something, you could just simply return back to the section and just move it another 10 feet, okay? But because I guessed correctly, there's nothing more for us to do there, okay? So that's the basic process that you have to do. It's going to come in and it's going to be way over your head. So you just simply find a view that shows it. In this case, the combination of the 3D view and the section view were what we needed. And then you move it to a more favorable position for this project. So now that I've got this file positioned where I want, I'm ready to use it to start creating some topography. In this video, we're continuing where we left off in the previous one, and we're going to take the imported CAD file that represents the contour lines of our site and convert that to a topography element here in the Revit project. So to show you what we're starting with, this item right here is a linked CAD file. Now, the first thing is, if you're not able to select the linked CAD file, then you want to come up here to the selection dropdown under the modify tool and make sure that select links is turned on. If that is turned off, you won't be able to select it. Okay, so this file contains AutoCAD geometry that are just simply polylines that are set at certain heights. So the easiest way to see this would be to go to the 3D view. And then if we just kind of zoom in on an area here, you can see that there's a lot of line work here that represents those contour lines. And these are set at different heights physically in 3D space in order to represent those contours. What we want to do is take that geometry from the AutoCAD file and turn that into Revit topography. Now, I should probably show you what a Revit topography element looks like first, right? So just off to the side here, I'm going to create a really simple Revit topography. So I'm going to go to the Massing and Site tab. So I'm going to click this Topo Solid button here. And I'm simply going to draw a rectangle using this tool here. And it doesn't really matter what size you draw it at. So just sketch out any size rectangle. Click Finish, and that creates this flat plane. But then what I want to do is use this Add Point tool here, and that puts me in kind of an edit mode. And I'm going to start off by placing a few points at the surface here, and I'm just going to kind of put a few random ones. Then I'm going to come over here to the Offset from Surface and put in a different height. Now, if you're working in the Imperial file, put in maybe 50 feet. And if you're working in the metric file, you could use about 15,000 millimeters. And then you want to just place several more points over here. Now, that's probably enough to give you the general idea. I'm going to click the Modify tool and escape out of there. But notice how that kind of created this hill here, and then Revit kind of adds in the contour lines along the way. So that's a topography element. Now, if you consider what we're trying to create over here and imagine trying to create all of those points manually, it would take an enormous amount of time. So it is certainly not a task that you would want to do manually. So I'm going to select this Topo Solid over here and delete it. We don't need that one anymore. And what we're going to do instead is create the Topo Solid based on this CAD file. So let's go back to the Topo Solid tool. And this time we're going to use the drop-down menu, and we're going to choose the Create from Import option. So that puts us in the creation mode, but then we need to additionally select what kind of import we want to base this on. So there's two options, a CAD file or a CSV file. We obviously have a CAD file, so we're going to choose that. And then you can select your CAD file. And again, remember, you must have select links turned on in order for this to work. Okay, so if that's not turned on, then you won't be able to do what I'm doing right now, which is selecting that file. Now, my civil engineer gave me a really clean file where there's only a couple layers in the file, and I don't want to create points from the 0 layer, but I do want to create it from each of the topo layers, major and minor. If you're doing this with another CAD file, you could get a long list of layers here. And so you do want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the layers in that CAD file first so that you can select only the layers that actually represent contour lines. You don't want it to create a bunch of false points on other geometry. But in this case, like I said, it's a very clean file, so we just need to select these two. So I'll go ahead and click OK on that. And this might take a little while. But actually, in this case, it wasn't that bad. Now, it is generating this warning here about some of the lines being slightly off axis. There are 6 of those. I think that is safe to ignore for this example. So I'm just going to click anywhere to dismiss that warning and ignore it. And you can see the result that we've created right here. Now, I'm going to reach in there and select the CAD file. And I want to hide that to kind of get it out of the way so that we're seeing only the topography that's left behind. So if you come down here to the little sunglasses on the view control bar, let's choose hide element. And that will put us in a temporary hide isolate mode where the CAD file is temporarily hidden and all we're seeing now is the topo solid object. So if you hold the shift key down and start to orbit around, you can see that this did a really nice job here. Now, if you want to see just how much work it did, you can actually select this, go to the Modify Sub-Elements tool, and you can see the tremendous amount of points that it created for you with that command. So naturally, we would not have wanted to create all of these points individually and manually. That would have been a very tedious and long task. So I'm going to just click the Modify tool here to cancel out. But of course, if there's any area of the topo that needs adjustment, you can go into that Modify mode that I just showed you there, and you can manipulate individual points. So that's certainly something that you can explore doing. At this point, the only thing I want to show you is it might look a little nicer if we turn on a shaded mode. So I'm going to click this little pop-up here, which has different display modes, turn on shading. Now everything is this kind of dull gray here, but you can actually select this. And instead of Topo Solid 1, we can choose one of the other types that's available in this file, like this one called Grassland. And when I choose that one, then it's going to apply grass on the top surface. So if I click away from it, you can see that's green. And then on the sides, it's still going to use the gray color because it's more of a earth down there. So it's possible to actually create a type that has multiple layers representing different layers of earth there. So that's the Topo Solid tool and generating it from an imported CAD file. So if you are working with a civil engineer, that is going to be the most efficient way to get your basic ground plane for your project. In this video, we're going to look at bringing in a CAD file, but controlling the way that it comes in, specifically its line weight settings. So sometimes you're bringing in a CAD file that you're going to keep as part of your document set. In cases like that, then it's going to matter what it actually looks like. If you're using it just to trace over or to generate topography, then it's not as important. But in the case of bringing in diagrams or details or things like that, then it might matter what the line weight settings are in the file coming in. And so that's what we want to look at here. Now, I'm in this simple file here, and I'm going to bring in a construction detail. It's probably not appropriate to do that in a floor plan. So let's create a view for this purpose. So I'm going to go to the View tab, and we're going to create a drafting view. Now, you need to give it a name, and then I'm going to assign it a scale. So if you're working in imperial, do 1.5 inch equals a foot. If you're working in metric, you can do 1 to 10. Now, a drafting view is just a blank sheet of paper. You can put anything you want here. It can be details, diagrams, sketches, illustrations, photographs, general notes, whatever. Anything that's not connected to the model. And what we're going to do is go to Insert and link a CAD file into this view. So let's click Link CAD. And then I want to bring in this file called AutoCAD Detail. And before we bring it in, I want to change some of the settings because the settings are configured for the last file that I brought in, which isn't really appropriate for this detail. So the first thing I want to change is the colors. I don't really want any of the colors for this file. I want to just force it to black and white. Next, we can bring in all the layers. That's fine. But I don't want it to use US survey feet. I'm going to go back to auto detect. I think that will work just fine for this detail. I don't need to worry about the units. I'm going to correct the lines that are off axis. That's optional, but it won't hurt anything. And then probably the most important thing is the positioning. The chances that the origin of this CAD file detail are in any kind of a useful location and that they match up to anything in the file I'm bringing it into, it's pretty slim. So I'm going to use one of the manual options here. And the one that I like for this purpose is manual center. Okay, so let me click open and show you what that does. So notice that manual center puts my cursor right in the center of the detail. And now I can just manually place it wherever I'd like it to go. So if we zoom in on this, you can see the problem that I want to solve in this video. Notice that it came in lifeless, right? Like there's just no punch to this detail whatsoever. Everything is very flat. Okay. So what I want to do is preserve the line weight qualities, the line weight settings of that CAD file as it's coming across. And in order to do that in Revit, we use a mapping table. So where do we get to this mapping table? Well, it's on the Insert tab. On the Import panel, there's this tiny little button here, really easy to miss if you're not looking for it. It's called Import Line Weights. So you want to click that, and that will display this dialog. So this is just a simple mapping table. What you have on the left are the AutoCAD color numbers from AutoCAD, and on the right, you have the corresponding Revit line weight. Now, there are 255 entries here, so it could take some time to fill this table out. Before you embark on that, let me also point out the note at the bottom of the dialog. That note says these values only apply when the line weight in the CAD file is set to default. In other words, if somebody in the CAD file has set a line weight on a layer, Revit doesn't need to map anything because the line weight information is there. It will just simply use it. But if it's left set to default, that means there is no line weight, and that's when this table kicks in. So that's kind of important to understand. So you might want to get familiar with your CAD file before you go to the trouble of setting up this file here. All right, how does this work? You just type in the numbers, right? Now, of course, to do this properly, you would have to have some knowledge of the colors that are being used in that CAD file, and then you would just go through and map them to the desired line weight on the Revit side of things. Now, once you've done all that work, you can save it to a text file for reuse. And I've done that for us already, which means that we can load the file that I've already created, and that's going to save us a lot of effort here. So let's click load. It's going to recognize that I've made some changes here and ask if I want to save them. Not going to do that. I'll say no. And then there's this file here called detail line weights. That's the file that I'm going to load in, which will set my mapping properly. When we're all done here, if you want to reset back to your original, I do have a reset file that you can load in later to do that. Okay, but I'm going to click open here. And at first it doesn't really look like it did very much, but if you scroll through here, you will start to see some entries have been changed. Okay, so it definitely brought in the required values. So let's click OK, but there's one more step. If you zoom in here, nothing has changed yet, which is a little disappointing considering that this is a link here. So what we actually have to do is go to Manage Links, CAD Formats. Let's remove the link, click OK, it disappears. And now I'm going to go right back to Link CAD, AutoCAD Detail, accept all the defaults because they match what I did a minute ago, click Open, click to place it on screen. And now you can see it has come in with those new line weights applied from the mapping table. So if you're planning to bring in CAD files that you want to use and have them based on some office standard, graphically speaking, then it's really important that you set up one or more of these mapping tables and you'll get much, much better results. So far in this chapter, we've been focused on bringing in AutoCAD files to Revit, but there are many file formats that are supported. In this video, I'd like to show you how we can bring in a PDF, which is another very popular format that's used in many industries, including architectural design. So we're going to go to the Insert tab, just like we did for CAD files, but this time, instead of doing Link CAD, we're going to do Link PDF. Now, you can link a PDF or you can import it. It's really up to you, but I still like Link because it maintains a connection back to that PDF file. So if somebody updates the PDF, you can just simply reload it, which I think is always a valuable thing to be able to do. So you can see that I've provided a floor plan right here, and I'm going to go ahead and click Open. And then when it starts to open this, it will preview it here. Okay, so in this case, this is a single sheet PDF. So you can see that it's page 1 of 1. There's a total of 1 page there. But if you have a multi-sheet PDF, then it would show you thumbnails of all the sheets. And unfortunately, with this command, you can only bring in 1 page at a time. So if you're trying to bring in all 10 pages of a 10-page multi-PDF, you're going to have to unfortunately do 10 links, 10 separate links, which is a little bit of a drag. But that's one of the only downsides. Otherwise, this feature works pretty well. Now, right here, we have a resolution. And I think in most cases, 150 to 300 is probably fine, but it really depends on what you're intending to do with this file. 600 is probably overkill in most cases, so I don't think I've ever used that. But for this, since it's a floor plan, I'm going to do 300, but I could probably get away with 150 in this case. But anyway, maybe a little trial and error there, but I think 300 will be okay. So let's click OK. And the next thing is it will ask me where I want to place this. Now, here's the only trouble with a PDF, okay? And actually, it's a similar concept with raster images. So we did Link PDF, but you also have Link Image. Both of them would kind of come in the same way. They're really not to scale. So what happened here is the size of this, if I measure from corner to corner here, this size is just some number based on the sheet size, right? So that was 144, which in imperial means that it was based on 12 in some way. So it saw that image as being 12 inches across, and I think it just brought it in at a reference to that. Anyway, it's not to scale, right? And so that's a bit of an issue. So there's a couple dimensions here in this file. So what I want to show you next is how we can do two things. If the PDF is vector graphics, which this one is, you can snap to those vector graphics. Okay, so object snaps will work, and we can scale it to get it to the appropriate size, right? So those are the two things that I want to look at. Now, you can bring in any kind of PDF. So if you bring in just a text document, obviously that one's not going to be snappable, right? Because there's nothing to snap to. So it really just depends on the file and how it was created. Okay, so the first thing is, let's go ahead and select the PDF. And that snaps feature must be enabled. So let me try and take a measurement here. And notice it's not seeing any of the snap points in this file. Okay. However, if I select the PDF and then I click this toggle right here, enable snaps, and then try and take a measurement, now it's seeing them. So make sure that you do that first. So this bathroom right here is supposed to be an imperial about 5 feet wide, and it looks like it's double that. It looks like it's 10 feet right now. Okay. So the file is too big. Okay. Well, I'm not going to rely on that measurement. You could do that if you didn't have a choice. I'm going to rely on the dimension that's actually right here in the file. So vertically, it's got a dimension of 31'8" or 9652 if you're working in metric. That's the number that I'm going to use. So I'm going to select this file, go to the scale command here, or RE is the shortcut. And scale can be done in one of two ways. You can do a graphical scale or a numerical scale. So you would use numerical if you wanted to make it twice as big or half as big, right? If you knew the exact amount that you wanted to scale it by. We don't know the exact amount we want to scale by in this case. We know a distance in the PDF and then how big we want to make it. That's what graphical is. So we're going to leave it set to graphical. And we're going to pick our start point, which using the object snaps, I'm going to click this lower endpoint right here. Then I'm going to drag up to the opposite endpoint here, which is the other end of that dimension, and click again. So that's my reference distance. Now I simply start moving the mouse and you can see a temporary dimension, and I just type in the value that I want this to be. So I want it to be 31'8" if I'm working in imperial, or the 9652 if you're working in metric. So now let's just verify that with a measurement. So if I measure from here to here, you can see that it is 31'8". If you can't see it there, you can also read the measurement right there. Okay. So that's really all there is to bringing in a PDF, and then of course, scaling it to make sure that it's the correct size if it represents model geometry.
In this video, we're going to continue looking at linking files, but we're going to shift our attention to linking Revit models. So it's often the case that project teams will have more than one Revit model, and in order to coordinate your efforts with the users in those other models, you can link them together. Now, this often happens in more complicated projects that have either multiple disciplines like architectural, structural, mechanical, plumbing. Each one of those disciplines would have their own model and they would link them together for coordination. So that's a very common scenario. We'll look at that scenario in the next video. In this video, we're going to look at another really common scenario, which is a multi-building campus situation. So this is where you just have 2 or 3 or 4 or more buildings on the same site, and you want to place them all together and position them relative to one another to coordinate your efforts there as well. So that's the example that we're going to look at here, albeit a very simple one of just putting a small outbuilding next to our building structure here. So what I'm going to do is go to the Insert tab, and the first button here is Link Revit, and I'll click that, and then we're going to link in this model here called Shed. Now, there are some positioning options here. In this video, we're just going to use the default, which is internal origin to internal origin. There are some others that you can explore on your own, but I want to keep this as simple as possible. So we're going to first bring it into the origin and see where it ends up. And as you can see, it's not in a very good spot. It's kind of right on top of our building. So now that we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is move and position it where it needs to go. So I've created these two reference planes off to the side here to indicate where this model needs to be. And all we need to do is click on it and move and rotate it to that new position. Now, if you're not able to select this link, if it's not highlighting and letting you select it, then you want to make sure that you come to this little drop down here on your modify tool and turn on select links. That has to be turned on in order for you to do the next step. So the first thing we're going to do is move it. So let's go to the move tool, and I'm going to use the lower right-hand corner as my base point of the move. Click that point. And then I'm going to snap that right to the intersection of these two reference planes over here, and I'm going to click that point. Then I will zoom in over on that location, and let's keep it selected and switch to rotate. I'm going to click anywhere on this little dot here to pick that up. That's the center of rotation. And I want to snap that right to the same endpoint as my starting point. Let's move straight up along that exterior wall there and set that as my starting angle. And then I want to tip it down and to the right here until it snaps to the reference plane. And that is my new rotation angle. So I'll zoom back out, and that is the desired position of this building. Now, in your own projects, somebody will have to figure out what that location is, and they can do that by any number of means using whatever design data is appropriate in your own project. So now that I've positioned that model where it needs to go, let me show you a few ways we can manage that link. Okay, so the first is to go to the Manage tab, and we've got the Manage Links button right here. So we're going to click that. And the first tab in this dialog is the Revit tab. So there's our shed model listed right there. It's currently set to a status of loaded. It's an overlay. There's the name of the file, and it's a relative path. Now, loaded is obvious because we can see the file on screen. If it was unloaded, it would disappear, and we would have to reload it in order to see it. The reference type can either be an attachment or an overlay. Ours is set to overlay. That's the default. That's the most common. But with attachment, what would happen is if the shed model had its own links, those links would follow all the way through to our top level host. With overlay, it leaves those links behind and only brings itself. Okay, so we're going to leave overlay. The path is showing up as just the file name right now. And that's because the path type is set to relative, but it could also be absolute. So if you change it to absolute, it writes the full path back to the drive letter. I personally prefer relative wherever possible. I think it's a little simpler. So that's what we're going to choose there. The only caution is just be careful if you ever move the files that you move both the host and the link in the same relative locations. You need to maintain the folder structure, otherwise it might break. Now, there are several buttons at the bottom that are grayed out. If you want to enable those buttons, you need to actually select the link, and you do that by clicking on it by name, and then you can see that those buttons at the bottom become available: reload, unload, remove, and so on. Let's not click any of those. Let's just click OK. That's your Manage Links dialog. Now, the other way that you can manage Revit links, it has its own special method that other types of links don't have, and that's here on the project browser. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom of the project browser, there's a Revit links branch here. Expand it, and now you can see any links that you have indented beneath that branch. So the little blue arrow indicates that it is currently loaded. Fantastic. So those are a couple different ways we can access the linked models. And then, of course, if you right click on this entry, you can even do things like reload it, unload it, and so on. So what happens when that model changes? Because that's really the big benefit of using a link, is that if that model changes in any way, we can capture those changes by simply reloading the link. Now, to demonstrate that will be a little bit tricky, because normally you would have one person working on the host model that I'm in, the office building, and another person working on a shed on a different computer. In that scenario, they would simply save the file and I would reload it, and we would be able to see those changes immediately. If you have the ability to work with another person to try this out, then I encourage you to do that. Have the other person open up the shed model and work on their computer, and you work in your host, and then you can experiment with what happens when one of you saves and the other one reloads. Okay. If you're not in that scenario, then what you'll have to do is what I'm about to demonstrate here. I'm going to try to open up that shed model to make changes to it. So I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Open, and then in this folder, I'm going to choose the shed and I'm going to click open. But that's going to tell me that that link is already open and I can't open it again, right? So it's telling me the only way I can do that is if I unload the link first. Okay, so that's just a limitation that we have with links. So I'm going to have to answer yes here. And then it's going to say, are you sure? You won't be able to undo this. That's fine. I'm going to click OK here, right? And that finally opens up the shed model. Now, what did that do back here in our office building model? Well, if I click on that, notice that it's no longer visible here. It's been unloaded, but it didn't get removed. It's not deleted. It's not gone. It's just simply sitting here unloaded. Notice the big red X is kind of a really nice graphical way of showing that. If you go to manage links, right here, it says not loaded. Okay. So the link's still there. It's just simply not loaded. All right, fantastic. Let's switch back to the shed and do something to it. So what I want to do is just make a change that will be obvious when we load it back in. So I'm going to select maybe this door and I'm going to change that to a double door. Now that should be pretty obvious when we load it back in. So that's all I really need to do. I'm going to save this file. But unfortunately, if I go back to here and I try to reload it, as I just indicated, if I select this and I choose reload, it's going to say you cannot reload it because it's already open, right? So I need to make sure that not only do I save it, I've got to close it here. Okay, so I'm going to X that out like so. And now that file is closed, which means I will now be able to reload it. So you can go back to manage links and do that, or you can right click it here and reload. It's just another way of doing it. That changes back to a blue arrow and the file loads, and you can now see that we have the double door. So we've captured those changes. Now, the alternative way that you could have done this is to close this file. And then when it asks you if you want to save, let's answer yes. Okay. And then what we can do is reopen the shed, make a change to it. So this time I will just copy this window. Okay. And then I'm going to close my shed, save it. And then when I reopen the host model, the original host model, it will automatically reload the latest changes. So notice that the third window is now there in the middle before. So those are a couple different ways that you can reload. So the only limitation was you can't have both your host and your link open together in the same session of Revit. If you're on two different computers, like I said, you can experiment with another coworker or a friend and try that out. Then you could experiment with it that way.
In this video, we're going to continue talking about linking Revit models. And if you watched the previous video, then I mentioned that there were two basic scenarios that were most common. One was a multi-building campus scenario, and that's what we demonstrated in the last video. And the other was a project that had multiple disciplines, and that's what I wanted to talk about here in this video. Now, when you have the multi-building campus scenario, you typically use an insertion point other than origin to origin because you don't want all your buildings to end up on top of each other. But in the discipline coordination that we're going to look at in this video, you do want everything to line up right on top of each other. So you're going to approach it slightly differently. So to help us with that, I'm in the Revit sample project. Now, you may recall a few chapters ago that we had this project open and we explored some of its features. So if you don't recall how to get here, this is included with your software and you can get to it on the file menu from the open command from the sample folders that's in there. So I'm not providing it separately as an exercise file. You should have a copy already with your copy of Revit. What I'm going to do here is just open up the L1 floor plan. And this project actually has several links in it already. Okay, so let's just zoom in here a little bit. And you can see that I'm going to show you that in a couple ways. So one way that we can see that is to maybe put our mouse over one of these steel columns here. Now, it's initially highlighting the architectural column that surrounds it, but I'm going to press the Tab key. That goes to the grid line. Again, another grid line. And then one more time, you'll notice that it's highlighting a Revit link. And I'm going to click to select that. And notice that that highlights not just that piece of steel, but all of them. Okay, because what I've just selected is the structural model. Okay, so there's a structural model, there's an electrical model, there's a plumbing model. There's models for each discipline. There's even two architectural models in this file. So there's one for the existing facades on the front of the building that were the existing structures, and then the new construction behind is the building that I'm in right now. So another way to see this is to go to Manage and Manage Links. And what you're going to see is that there are a number of Revit links already here in this file. Now, let me widen this dialog just so that we can stretch it out and read those names a little better. Okay, so let's stretch this there. Okay, so these are each of the models that are already linked here. Every one of these models is using the origin to origin for the positioning, because the whole point of discipline coordination is you want all the models to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. You want everything to just sort of slide in correctly in its proper location. So the easiest way to achieve that is using origin to origin. So what I want to do is, it's already done here, but we can actually drop one of these models and then do it again ourselves, right? So I'm going to do the structural model since that's the one that we just talked about. So I'll simply select it here and click remove. Now it's going to warn me that I can't use undo after doing this. So just be aware, but that's fine. We're not going to save this anyway. So we'll just click OK. And then let's click OK again. And now you're going to see that all of those steel columns disappear here in this view, right? So we no longer have the structural model for coordination at this point. So now what I want to do is add that link back again and use the origin to origin positioning. So we're going to go to Insert. We're going to Link Revit. Now, I want to make sure that I'm in the samples folder. You may not actually be here already. So I've put the path on my clipboard and I just want to show you where it is. So I'm going to paste that in right here. It's in your C drive or wherever you installed Revit, in the Program Files folder, Autodesk, then your Revit version, and finally samples. Okay, so that's the default location that these models are stored in. So I want to just make sure that I'm going there by entering that path. And then each of the models starts with the name Snowden Tower Sample, and then you've got the different disciplines. So the one that we want to attach in this case is the structural model. And there's these nice labels here in the preview to let you know that you're getting the correct one. So that just verifies that we're getting the structural model there. And here's that setting that we want to make sure that we've chosen. It should say internal origin to internal origin. So that's the correct choice to ensure that all of these models line up properly with one another. I'll click open here. And you can already see that it's working in the background. But before we get there, we've got this nested link message here. And this we can safely ignore, but let me just explain to you what it means. It is telling us that the structural model that we're bringing in has links of its own. So if we were to open that structural model, you can see that it is linking to all of the other disciplines. And in fact, that's true really of all these models. Each one is linking to each other, okay? Because the folks on the structural team want to be able to coordinate their efforts with the other disciplines, and the folks in the other disciplines want to be able to coordinate with the structure. So everybody links to each other's models. And so that you don't end up with a bunch of redundant copies of everything all jumbled up on top of each other, this message just tells us that the nested links will be ignored. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what we want to happen here. So we're going to click close to dismiss that warning. And you can see that the structure came back in exactly the correct location. So if you want to experiment a little bit further with linking, and specifically with linking that has to do with discipline coordination, then I encourage you to spend some more time in this file and explore, because this is a really good example of discipline coordination using Revit linking. In this video, I've got a model with a link, and I want to position the link relative to the model that it's linked to. And in this case, the building model is down here in the lower right-hand corner. This is my little office building model. And then up here, I have this object, which is the linked site model. So inside that linked model is the site information. It's got a topo solid and a property line and so on. Now, at first, your instinct might be that you should move the building to the site. And there's a certain amount of logic to that. Makes a certain amount of sense. But because I'm in the building model file, I actually want to do the reverse. So I want to pick up this linked site model and I want to move it over to the correct location relative to the building. Now, the reason why that's better is because by doing that, you're just simply moving the link. You're not actually changing anything in the site model. So you don't have to worry that you're changing the coordinate systems or the reference points or the survey or anything like that. You're just simply moving that link. and it will refresh in place. Okay, so it's going to work perfectly fine. And the reason why that's valuable is if you consider all the project setup that we've got in this project template here, we have all these sheets already configured. We have these scope boxes here, the views, everything is already focused on a certain area. Imagine how much work it would be to try and move all of that over to the site. It doesn't make any sense to do it that way. Okay, so what you typically want to do is bring your site information in or your linked information in and then move that to the host location. Now, I'm going to show you two methods to do that here in this video. I'm going to use the move and rotate command in method 1, and then I'm going to use the move and align command in method 2. And both methods work perfectly fine. You can use whichever one you like. It's up to you, but I just thought I would give you two options. So let's start with move and rotate. It'll involve a couple steps. Because we're zoomed out so far away, what I like to do is do a rough move first. So from this far away zoom, I'm going to go to my move tool, and I'm just going to pick a random start point right about there in the middle of the site, and then just kind of move that diagonally down in front of the building. Now, if you can't move along a diagonal, just look up here on the options bar. There's this checkbox called constrain. If that's turned on, you can only move horizontally or vertically. So you just want to uncheck that, make sure that's off, and then you should be able to move diagonally like so, and just kind of place that out in front of the building. So now you can zoom in a little bit more closely, and it's going to be a lot more comfortable to work because we can see things a little bit more clearly. The next thing is I want to know where the front door of the building is, because this sidewalk here, I want to go right up to the front door. Okay. Now, I can't really see that, so the next thing that I'm going to do is come down here to the view control bar and click the display modes pop up here, and I want to choose wireframe. I'm just going to do this temporarily, and that's going to make everything fully transparent, right? So now I can see right through the building, and there's the front door right there. So now I'm going to select the site model if it's not already selected, go back to the move tool, and I'm going to pick the midpoint at the end of that sidewalk. That's my start point of the move. And then you can even zoom in a little closer if you want here. And I want to snap that to the midpoint at the front door. So now we've lined up those two midpoints. And so now all we need to do is rotate it to get it to the correct orientation. Okay. So let's go to our rotate tool. But here's the trouble. If you start to rotate right now, you're going to mess up that movement that you just did. And the reason for that is only evident if you zoom all the way out. So let's zoom all the way out here and notice the dashed box that surrounds the site model. When you go to the rotate command, whatever you have selected, it puts a bounding box around the whole thing. And then it just sort of drops this little dot in the middle of that box. And that's the center of rotation. Now, you can rotate around that point if you want to, but often it's not a very convenient spot. So there's a number of ways you can pick up that dot and move it. You can click it, you can drag it, you can tap the space bar, or you can use this place button here on the options bar. It doesn't matter which one of those you choose. Just pick that dot up, and then let me zoom back in, and I'm going to put it down right there at that midpoint. So now I'll be rotating around that location, and it will keep the site model right where it needs to go. So with rotate, I can do a start angle along some existing vector here. So I'm just going to go along the sidewalk here, and then you just sort of swing it here until it snaps to the building. And just like that, we've now corrected the orientation to match the front of the building. And if you zoom out, you can see that our site now matches the building geometry correctly. Okay, so that is the first method for moving and aligning that. Now I'm going to undo just a couple steps here. Back to when we were sitting out here kind of randomly. And as an alternative, instead of using rotate, you can use the align tool. Like I said, it's 50-50. It's up to you which one you want, but I just thought I would show you two options. So let's go to the align tool, or AL. I'm going to pick the front face of the building here as my alignment reference, and then the edge of the sidewalk. That will align and rotate it for us, but we still will need to do one final movement. Select it, go to the move command, and then go from midpoint to midpoint. And you might need to type SM to get it to sense the midpoint, and you're right back in the same place. So either one of those methods works perfectly fine, but now we've got our site model positioned correctly relative to our building, at least here in floor plan. There is one more thing we want to check. So I'm going to go to the south elevation here, and what you're going to notice is that we still need to do one more movement, and that's in the vertical direction. So obviously we don't want our building to be underneath our site. That doesn't seem very correct to me. But all that's required here to fix this is to just simply move this vertically in this elevation view. Now you can do it with the move command. I prefer to use the align command. So I'm going to go to align, and I'm going to highlight my L1 as the reference. And then I'm going to use the project level here in the linked model as the object to move. And now that completes the modification. And if I look at this in 3D, you can see that our building is now sitting correctly on its site. In this video, we're going to establish a shared coordinate system. Now, what exactly do we mean by a shared coordinate system? Well, it's a concept that we use when we have linked files. And what we want to do is take the independent coordinate systems of the individual models and consolidate them together into a single shared coordinate system. So each model has its own coordinate system, its own origin and its own position in the world. And usually these are completely independent of other models. Once you start linking those models together, however, you can decide that you want one of those coordinate systems for one of the models to be, think of it as the dominant one, and then you can copy that coordinate system and overwrite the coordinate systems in the other models. By doing that, then what you're doing is essentially giving each model an awareness of its position in the world relative to the other models. And it becomes a really handy tool to help us make sure that our models are lined up with one another correctly and that they're easy to keep coordinated. So what I have here to help us demonstrate this is 3 models. We're in a model called office building. And so that's the actual model geometry here of the building itself. But then we've got a link here for the site information and a separate link right here for this little shed building. Okay, so at the moment, each of these models is completely separate from one another in terms of its coordinate systems. Like they each have their own separate coordinate system that doesn't know anything about the others. So if we wanted to establish links in one of the other models, we'd really have to set the whole thing up over again manually. And it might be a little error prone to try and get everything to sit on the site correctly. By establishing a shared coordinate system, we can do that much more efficiently. So the first thing we have to decide is which of these 3 models do we want to use as the coordinate system to copy to the others, right? So which one's going to be the dominant, I like to think of it as. Now, for me, I personally think the site makes the most amount of sense for that because the site is really what's being shared by the other buildings on the site. So I typically like to do that. So I'm going to start by selecting the site. And then if you go over to the properties palette, you can see that it is a linked Revit model. And then I'm going to scroll down here and you're going to see at the bottom an item that says shared site. And there's a button that says currently not shared. You can click that button and that takes us to the shared coordinates dialog. So here it offers us 2 options. We can either publish or acquire the coordinate system. And again, it depends on what your aim is here. Do you want to take the coordinate system of the site model and use that as the dominant coordinate system, or do you want to overwrite the coordinate system within the site model? Well, in this case, I want the site model to dominate. Therefore, I want to acquire its coordinates into the office building model. So remember, everything is relative to where you are. And so I'm in the office building model right now. I've selected a link and I'm going to copy the coordinates out of that link by acquiring them and apply them to this current model that I'm in, the office building. And I'll just simply click reconcile here to complete that operation. When I do that, this now says default site instead of not shared. So if it says here anything other than not shared, then you know that there is a shared coordinate system established. Now, that only applies to 2 of the 3 models. So the site and the office building now share a coordinate system. But what about our outbuilding over here? Well, we also need to repeat those steps for that building. So notice when I select it, it says not shared as well. I'm going to click it, but this one I'm going to do a little differently, because if I acquire that coordinate system, then it's just going to overwrite the office building yet again. That's not what I want. What I want to do instead is take the coordinates that are now in my office building, which came originally from the site model, and I want to push those to the shed model. So we do that with publish, and I'll click reconcile again. So now you can see the button has changed. All right, so we're almost there, but there's one last very important step. We must save our work here. Now, in order to do this, you need to have write access to all the models, because you're not only going to be saving the current model, the office building, but you'll also be saving the shed and the site model as well. So I'm going to come up here to the quick access toolbar and click the save icon, or you can do Control S. And when I do, it's going to alert me that the current position in the shed model has changed. So this is what I was talking about. Until you save both the host model, office building, and the links, it's not permanent. So you need to click this option here to save that new position back to the link, and it will actually overwrite that linked model with this new information. If you choose do not save or disable shared positioning, it's going to undo everything we did. So we want to choose the save option right there. So that's it. We've now established shared coordinates. Now, what does that do for us? Well, let's take a look at some of the things we can do. I'm going to go to the File menu here and choose Close. That's going to close my office building model. You may recall from an earlier video that you can't have both a host and a link open at the same time in the same session of Revit. So the easiest way to prevent that is to just close the model. Okay, so now I'm going to open up my site model. So I'm going to go to Open here, and in the Chapter 5 folder, I'm going to choose the building site. But before I do, I just want to point out a few things to you. Remember that we saved our office building and we saved our shed building. So you can see that here because both of them have a backup file now. Okay, so when we did that save operation, it didn't just save the office building, it actually saved the shed as well. All right, let's select the building site. Let's open it up. And I'm going to zoom in just a touch here. And here is the benefit of a shared coordinate system. I'm going to go to Insert, Link Revit. I'm going to locate the office building. And instead of using the other positioning options that we've been looking at up until now, I'm going to switch this to Auto by Shared Coordinates. When I do, and I click Open, the office building model will come in precisely the right location. Now, it is warning me that there's a nested link that's going to be left behind. Perfectly fine. Let me click Close there. And notice that the office building drops in exactly the correct location. Now, I could repeat that with the shed model. Shared coordinates, click Open, and it will come in the correct place as well. So now all the buildings on this campus know about each other and they're all fully coordinated. Now, let me close this model. I'm doing that with Control W, the keyboard shortcut, or you can go to File, Close. I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to go to Open, and I'm going to do one last example. I'm going to open the shed model. And here I'm going to go to Insert, Link Revit, pick the office building by shared coordinates, click Open. Now, initially, it's going to look like it's coming in the wrong spot, but that's only because it needs us to confirm this message, which again is about nested links. As soon as I close that, that will correct the orientation and location of the office building. And you can see that it came in oriented correctly relative to the shed model. This is the advantage of shared coordinates. Once you've established each of the building's positions on the site, shared coordinates takes care of the rest. You can easily cross-link all of the other files and everything will come in correctly and stay up to date. Now, one last thing I want to point out to you is if you are setting up a shared coordinate system with a model that has geo-referenced coordinates, those coordinates will come across in Revit. So there's an example of that in the out-of-the-box Revit sample model. Now, we've opened up the sample model previously here in this course. I welcome you to open it up directly and see this for yourself. And when you do, what you want to do is go to the Manage tab, Then on the Manage tab, you want to click the Location button. And then when you go to the Location button, you will see here that for the location of that file, it is going to show you a georeferenced coordinate system, which happens to be in Pennsylvania in the United States. So that sample model that comes with the software has a true georeferenced physical location. And if you acquire shared coordinates from a model that's been georeferenced, it will also acquire those georeferenced coordinates. The file that we were working on just now is not georeferenced, so it doesn't do that, but the sample model is one that you can look at to see an example of that. In this video, we're going to talk about managing links. Now, I'm starting without an exercise file loaded because I want to actually show you the process when I open the file. The file that I'm going to open will have a problem with some of its links, and I want you to see that problem occur together. So here on the home screen, I'm going to click the Open button under Models. And in the exercise files folder, I'm going to choose the file that I want to open, Manage Links, or Manage Links if you're working in Metric. Now, when the file opens, it will display with this unresolved references warning. So there are two options here. You can open Manage Links to correct the problem, or you could just ignore it and continue. Now, since this is a video about managing links, I think the appropriate choice is the first one, to open the Manage Links dialog to correct the problem. But of course, in your own projects, if you're not ready to deal with the link issues just yet, you can always ignore it. So this dialog will never prevent you from actually opening the file, but it is suggesting that you might want to take a look at the links and see what the issues are. So when the dialog opens, it takes me to the Revit tab here, and you can see that there are two links in this file. So the building site link here, the first one, is loading just fine. So notice its status says that it's loaded here and there are no issues. But it's this second file here called Workshop, which currently says that the status is not found. So that is the issue. Now, why is it not found? There could be a number of reasons for that. So perhaps the file has been deleted. Perhaps it's been moved. It might have been renamed, right? So all of these are potential issues. Perhaps the drive that the file is stored on is no longer attached to your computer. It could be a network drive that you no longer have access to. So there isn't just one solution to solving the problem, but this flags that there is that issue, and those are all the things you might want to investigate. So the first thing I want to typically look at is what is the saved path. So this is looking for this file in a folder that's one step up from the current folder called Project Links. So down at the bottom of the screen, there are some buttons to manage this link. We could either do reload from or reload to try and reload the link. Now, reload is typically what you would want to try and do here, but of course, it would still generate the same warning because it's not finding the location of that file. So reload's probably not going to work. Unload is grayed out because it's already unloaded, but in the case of the building site, we could select that and choose unload. Add just adds an entirely new link, so that's obviously not going to solve the problem that we have here. If you've decided that you no longer want the workshop, that even though it's not found, it's actually not necessary, then you could just simply remove it, and that would prevent the warning from displaying the next time you open this file. So if the file is no longer necessary, that's probably a good idea. But in this case, let's say that we do want the file. So we want to click reload from to try and locate it in whatever location it's currently in. So when you click this, that's taking me to the Chapter 5 folder. And if I go up one step, here in my exercise files folder, notice I do not have a subfolder called Project Links. So that's why this file is not found. Okay, so perhaps the folder was deleted or renamed. Well, there is a links folder here. So why don't we take a look in there? So I'm going to double click there, and that's where we will find this workshop file. So it looks as though that folder was simply renamed in this case, and that is what has caused the issue here. So I can select the file, I can click open. That satisfies the link and Revit here, and you can see it. The status now currently says that it is loaded, and it writes the new path in that new location. So I'll click OK, and you'll see this small little outbuilding appear right here. Let's zoom in to get a better look. So you can see that's a version of our shed file, slightly different than the one that we were using previously, and now everything appears to be working correctly. So that is how you can deal with a situation where you get that dialog at the start that tells you that there is a problem with one or more of your linked files. Now, The solution here was pretty simple. It was just in a different folder, but as I said, it could be any number of other issues. The file could be renamed, have been deleted. The drive letter that it's on could no longer be available, and so on. So you might have to investigate some other issues if you run into this problem on your own. Now, I'm going to go to the Manage tab here and go back to Manage Links. And let's talk about a few other items in this dialog. So it doesn't really matter which one of the links I focus on here. So I'll just click the workshop again. And the two things I want to talk about is the path type here, which is two choices, relative and absolute, and then the reference type in a moment. So what does relative and absolute mean? Well, that has to do with the saved path in the file. So right now it's a relative path. So you can see that the path starts with two dots. That just means go back one folder and then go from there to the links folder and then the name of the file. If I change this to absolute, it will write the entire path all the way back to the drive letter. Now, some folks prefer absolute paths. I personally prefer relative paths, but it is a matter of preference. Both kinds of paths can break, but I think relative paths tend to be a little bit more stable because you can actually move the entire project structure around without breaking the links as long as all the relative folders remain intact. Okay, so that's the path type. What about reference type? Well, there's also two choices there as well. So there's overlay and attachment. Now, the default is overlay, and that is the simplest form of link. When you set up a link as an overlay, it only considers the file that you're bringing in and not any of that file's own links. So if we were to link in the workshop and it had a link of its own, with overlay, it will ignore that link and leave it behind. If you change this to attachment, however, then it would not only bring in the workshop, but it would bring in the workshop's own nested links. So I have an example of that to show you with the building site, actually. So what I'm going to do is I want to just move this out of the way here, and I want you to focus over here on the left-hand side of the site. Okay, kind of near this tree on the far left. So what we're going to do is point to a different version of the building site. And that building site has its own nested link in it. And when we change the reference type to attachment, it will bring that link across. Okay, so I've got building site selected here. I'm going to choose reload from, and then I'm going to go up one step here. The name of the file is called alt site, alt for alternate. And I'm going to choose that and click open. Now, if I click OK here, you're going to see that it comes in, and notice that it brings along this second building here, this nested link that's inside of it. Now, the reason it brought that nested link is if we were to open the alt site file directly and go to manage links, you would find that the link in that file is set to attachment. So it's not important whether it's set to attachment here. It's not alt site that needs to be attachment. It's the links within alt site that are set to attachment. And that's why we're seeing it through here. Now, the Manage Links dialog doesn't really clearly show that there's a nested link. So let me show you another way that we can manage our links. If you scroll all the way down on the project browser, you will see a Revit links branch here on project browser. Beneath that, you will have each of our links with this little blue arrow next to them. The blue arrow indicates that they are currently loaded. At the start of the video, had we looked over here, we would have seen a red X next to Workshop. So when Workshop was not found, it would have been unloaded. Now notice that Alt Site also has a little plus sign next to it. So if I click that, you can see that it expands forward, and there's the nested attachment right there called Outbuilding. So the browser shows it a little bit nicer in terms of the hierarchy and the structure than what we see in the Manage Links dialog. Now, in the browser, you can also right-click and get to many of the same options that we saw in the Manage Links dialogs. We can reload, we can unload, we can reload from. So there's a lot of those same choices there. So really it is your preference whether or not you want to access the manage functions from the dialog or from the right click. Now, the last thing I want to show you is I'm going to right click Revit Links directly. So not any of the links beneath it, but the actual Revit Links branch. There's another way to get to the Manage Links dialog. And we've been focusing on the Revit tab here in this video, but Any other linked file that you create will also show in this dialog. So this is kind of like the master control panel for anything that's linked. So you've got IFC formats and CAD formats. You've got point clouds, topography, coordination models, PDFs. So in some of the earlier videos in this chapter, we've looked at some of those other formats. So feel free to explore in any of those sample files as well, or on your own files to manage those links through that dialog. Architectural design frequently makes use of repetitive elements. And when you have such elements in Revit, you can use a tool called groups to help you manage them. So to demonstrate, I'm going to be working with this 2-bedroom apartment unit layout here. And what I want to do is group it so that we can make multiple copies of it. And the advantage of grouping something first is that if you then come back and make a modification to one of the instances of that group, that modification will apply to all instances. So it just becomes a very useful way for you to manage those repetitive design elements. So let's go ahead and get started here by making a selection of everything that we see on screen. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom right-hand corner and drag a crossing selection around all of the geometry. Now, just to verify, you should see a quantity of 115 over here on the properties palette. Okay, so there are 115 elements in my selection. So now I'm going to go to the Create Group button here on the ribbon, or you can type GP. Now, notice that the dialog that appears says create a model group and an attached detail group. Now, why is that? Well, let me just move this out of the way here. And what we have in our selection is model geometry, which includes categories like walls, doors, windows, rooms. But we also have detail geometry, which includes the room tags, the door tags, and the window tags, those little symbols with the text in them, right? Those are all what we call detailing. So those kinds of elements can't be together in the same group. So the way that Revit manages this is we have two groups, one containing each class of element. So for the model geometry, I'm just going to call that 2-bedroom unit. And for the attached detail group, since all it contains is tags, I'll just simply call that tags, and I'll click OK. So it's not really that important what you name those things, just as long as you use a nice descriptive name that makes sense to you and your team. Now, you can tell that you have a group because you'll get this dashed box around it. So notice the outline here on the edge. Now, what I'm going to do is click away from it to deselect everything, and then I'm going to move back and start to highlight it, and you're going to see that dash box appear. And it's going to tell you that that's a model group. Now, if you click to select, notice that selects only the model geometry. All of the tags are not selected because those tags are in a separate group called a detail group. So let's click away from it to deselect and start moving nearby this window tag. And notice we get a separate dashed box, and that tells us that's an attached detail group. Now, you can tell that it's an attached detail group when you click on it because it will have this little paperclip icon here in the middle indicating that it is attached. Okay, so that's what we created when we did the group command. Now let's, see some of the things we can do with this. First of all, I want to add another instance of this model group. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and maybe pan over here to give myself some room. And the way that you add another one is to scroll down on the project browser, and we're going to locate the groups branch here, and I'm going to expand that, and then scroll down further, and you'll see both a detail branch and a model branch. And then I'm going to expand that model branch because that's where my 2-bedroom unit is. Now, you may be surprised that the detail branch is not expandable. So where did those tags go? Where did that tag detail group go? Well, because it's an attached detail group, it's actually indented beneath its parent model group right here. So you can see that the hierarchy is established there to let you know that tags relies on that parent group of 2-bedroom unit. So what I'm going to do is just simply drag and drop 2-bedroom unit from the browser somewhere in the drawing window. And then I'll just click over here to the right to place it next to the first one. Now I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel. I'm just going to make the one copy there. Come back and select that model group. And the next thing I want to point out to you is this little symbol here in the middle. So you can see there's a little dot here and then an X and a Y. That indicates the insertion point of this group, or the origin point of this group. So I'm going to click that and drag it because it's kind of sitting randomly in the middle there. And I think a more useful location for it would be up here at the middle of the exterior wall. So now you can see it's right in that location. And if I zoom out and come back and select this first instance, notice that it is moved in that one as well. So that's the first example of being able to make a modification to one instance of the group and having it apply to all instances. Now, what's the advantage of having done that? Well, let's zoom out a little further and give ourselves some more room over here to the right. Let's drag in another copy of 2-bedroom unit. And now notice that we're dropping it in relative to that new location of the insertion point rather than that random center point. So if you create a group and you want to relocate the insertion point, it's pretty easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Modify tool to cancel there. Now, you'll notice that these two instances here do not have any tags. So when we drag them in, it just brought in the model groups. Now, to add the tags, the attached detail groups, the process is a little different. So instead of drag and drop, we're going to select the ones that we want to add the tags to, both of these on the right here. And then I'm going to click the Attach Detail Groups button. So that's up here on the ribbon. In this dialog, you'll see any attached detail groups that are available. We only have the one, so we're going to check that one and click OK. And that will add a set of tags to each of those instances. Now, I'm going to zoom in over here on the original copy, the very first group that we created, and the entry space. And notice the number of the entry is entry 101. And the doors surrounding it are 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so just kind of make a mental note of that. Now we're going to move over here to the entry of the middle group, and notice that this is entry 110 with doors 14, 15, and 20. And then if I come over here, it's entry 133 with doors 26, 27, and 32. So what is that telling us there? Well, even though these are groups, the individual elements within the groups are seen as unique elements within your Revit model. So Revit doesn't just create some sort of amorphous element now called a group. It actually recognizes the presence of those individual doors, windows, rooms, walls, and so on inside the group. Now, you may be then wondering, well, why is this tag B and this one is also B over here for this window? Why didn't it work for the windows when it did for the doors and the rooms? Well, that's just simply a different kind of tag that we're using for the windows. So in the case of the windows, instead of asking the question, what is your number? It's asking the question, what kind of window are you? But I can show you that if you were to hover over the window, press tab and click on it, scroll down a little bit, that's window mark 100. And if I come over to this one, tab in and click it, that's mark 103. So those two are unique windows. It's just that the tag is not reporting that information. The tag is instead reporting what kind of window it is. And you can see that by tabbing in, clicking edit type, scrolling down, and there's the type mark right there. So that's what's going on with the different tags. So that's a nice benefit of the groups, is that even though these are in groups, each of the elements is considered a unique thing in your model. So now let's talk about changing the group, right? So it doesn't matter which one you select, but select one of the instances of the model group. And now I want to make some variation. So to do that, I'm going to click the Edit Group tool here, or EG. That tints the background of the screen in this yellow color and puts me in group edit mode. And what I can do here now is make some changes. Now I'm going to do a really simple change. I'm just going to select this window at the top, copy it down to the bedroom down below, click Modify, and that's all I want to do. I'm going to click Finish. When I do, I want you to watch the right and the left instance of the bedroom and see what happens. And notice that even though we were only editing the one in the middle, the two bedrooms on either side also got the window. That's what we're doing when we create groups. That's the benefit. That's the reason why you want to create groups. A change made to one is going to apply to all of them. Now, you may be wondering where the tag is. Well, remember, the tag is in a separate group. So in order to get that tag to appear on the new window, you would need to edit that attached detail group and add it. So let's do edit group. To add it, we're going to use the tag tool here, tag by category. I don't want a leader, so I'm going to uncheck the leader, and I'm just going to touch this window. Now, be careful, because if you just go right in and click it, it'll actually try and tag the group itself. Press your tab key to get to the window, and then you can tag it. Click finish, and you're going to see it add that tag to the other two windows on the other side. Okay? So let's do one more modification. In addition to being able to modify and have it applied to all the groups, maybe instead of updating them all, you want to try a variation. So I'm going to select one of the instances of my model group. Again, it doesn't matter which one. I'm going to go to edit type this time. And up here at the top, we just have the one type, the original one that we created, 2-bedroom unit. So I'm going to duplicate that and give this a new name and click OK. So it doesn't really matter what you call the second one. It's up to you. And then I'm going to immediately edit that group. Now here, I'm going to take this window at the bottom of the plan and change that to a bay window to match the neighboring space over here. So now it looks like that. And then I'm going to select this window that we copied a moment ago, and I'm going to delete it. Now, you may be seeing already over here on the left-hand side that the tag already deleted. So unlike adding, where you had to specifically edit the group to add the tag, when you delete the host, the tag doesn't have a choice but being deleted. So in the case of delete, we don't need to do that extra edit. Let's click finish here. And now notice that the changes do not apply to the other groups. And that's because this one is the one that I've called alternate windows, where this one is still the original. But now I could select one or both of these, and I could change them to the alternate one, and it will swap out in place. So that gives you a way to do variations. So if you want to have 2 or 3 different variations of each apartment unit, you can mix and match throughout your design. So I encourage you to experiment further here in this file and kind of get comfortable with the group functionality. We've really just scratched the surface, but there's just so many possibilities for this tool. And it is a really great tool to use for any repetitive elements that you might have throughout your design. Once you've created a group, it's a pretty easy matter to duplicate it a few times and create really an entire floor plan layout. So what I'm going to do here is take my 2-bedroom unit and make a few copies of it to create the entire floor plate for a condominium building here. So I'm going to zoom in just a touch here and select this instance of the model group. So this is the 2-bedroom unit down here. And the way that I'm going to make my copies is using the mirror tool. Now, Revit actually has 2 mirror tools. So if we look on the Modify tab, there is Mirror Pick Axis and Mirror Draw Axis. Now, we're going to do both of them, but I'm going to start with Mirror Pick Axis. MM is the shortcut. And the way this tool works is you simply select some element in the model that you want to use as the axis of reflection. And so for me, that's going to be this wall at the top of the plan here. And I'll click that. And after a moment or two, it will generate the copy of the model group and also generate a warning. Now, you want to be careful here if you want to actually read this warning, because if you click anywhere on screen, the warning will disappear. Okay, so these warnings down here in the corner with the yellow background, they disappear if you click anywhere. But what it's saying is that highlighted walls overlap. And then it goes on to tell you some of the consequences of that situation. But I'm going to just click anywhere now. And of course, you can see what I meant with the warning. It dismisses it. It also deselects the group here. And then I'm going to zoom in that situation. And even without all of the potential downsides that the warning was alerting us to, you can see it just doesn't look right. Okay, so it's clear that there's something going on here. So how do we fix this? Is there a solution? And it turns out that there is, and it's one of my favorite features of groups. So here's all you need to do. Hover over one of the model groups. It doesn't really matter which one. Press the tab key, and that will jump to the next one. press the tab key again, and that will reach inside of the group and allow you to click and select the wall that's inside that group element. Once you've got it selected, you can either click this little icon right here, which says group member, or you can just simply press your delete key. Either way, that will exclude that item from one of the instances of the groups. Now, to show you that, what I'm going to do is temporarily pull these two apart. So I'm going to select the group here at the top. I'm going to go to my move command. I'm going to click anywhere to start, pull it up any random amount and click. That will generate another one of those warnings down at the bottom, which we can safely ignore. So let's just click anywhere to dismiss it. And notice the result of what we did was that the wall in one of the groups has been removed. So it literally removes that instance. Now, it still knows of that wall. So if you move your mouse near the edge of the group, it will highlight and you could see that wall ghosted in. And you could even tab in and select it and restore that element using this icon that we used to remove it in the first place. So that would be one option. The other option would be to just select the group and then choose Restore All Selected. Now, the caution with Restore All Selected is that restores everything you've excluded. So if you've excluded 2, 3, 4, 5 different elements, with Restore All, it brings them all back. Okay, where if you tab in, you can do them individually if you want to. Now, I'm going to undo once, twice to get that back again, but that is not only excluding an element from an instance of the group, but also how you would restore it. So now that we've done that, we've got half the plan taken care of. Let's zoom out here. And now we're going to look at the other mirror tool. Okay, so this time what I'd like you to do is select both model groups. So I'm using my control key there. And I want to also select the attached detail group on the one down at the bottom. So the easiest way to get to it is this window tag over here. Hold the control key and click it. So you should see 3 here for your selection. When I've got those 3 elements selected, we certainly could use mirror pick axis again because we happen to have this reference plane here in the middle of the screen, but I actually don't want to use that reference plane. What I want to do instead is show you the draw axis tool. Okay, so it's just another way to mirror. So we're going to do mirror draw axis, or DM. And the way this works is you just simply click somewhere on screen. So I'll click right about here and then start pulling the mouse in the direction that you want your axis of reflection. So for us, that's going to be straight up vertically, and then just click anywhere to create that axis of reflection. So it's kind of like a virtual axis of reflection, and you'll see everything will mirror around that location. Now, once we've done that, I want to pull these together and kind of tighten up that space in between. Now, if you're not seeing a bunch of dimensions on screen like I am, come over here to the ribbon and click this Activate Controls icon. Okay, so when you toggle that on, you should be seeing lots of dimensions. And the dimension that I want to modify is this one down here toward the bottom, which is giving us the distance between the group on the left and the right. So I'm going to click right in that label, and I'm going to change it to 10 if you're working in imperial, or 3000 if you're working in metric, and then press enter. Now, when I do that, you're going to see a really strange behavior happen with the attached detail group. So this is kind of a interesting and slightly unexpected behavior, but here's basically what's happening. So the rooms have these room labels, and we haven't really talked about rooms yet, but rooms are special in a variety of ways in Revit. And we are going to discuss them in a future video. But in general, what you need to know right now about room tags is room tags get unhappy when they're outside of their parent room. To solve that, you can turn on the leader. Okay. So Revit is trying to do this for us automatically, as you can see. So all of the room tags you can see have just sprouted these leaders. The trouble is when we did the move, it got confused over the position. And so the tags are still outside of their rooms somehow. So to solve that, what we're going to do, like the workaround that I'm going to use to get around that problem, is to just select that attached detail group and delete it. And then I'm going to add it back again. And in fact, I'm going to add it to all 3 instances that don't have tags by selecting them with the control key, clicking attach detail groups, and then I'll check the tags box here and click OK. And that should take care of the problem. Okay. So these new instances of the attached detail groups are now correctly situated on top of their respective rooms. So it's a little bit of a strange behavior there, but rather than panic, it was a pretty easy workaround to solve it. So now we've got the overall layout, and it was just a matter of doing a few quick duplicates with the mirror commands. And of course, there are some additional things that would happen here. You can box in some stairwells and some elevators and so forth. But you could see where if you're working with groups, you can very quickly create the majority of a floor plan layout just simply by copying and mirroring those groups around.